So let's continue talking about elements. So carbon is the second most common element in your body, and it is the fourth most common element in the universe. So an organic molecule has a carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon bond, and at least one carbon to hydrogen bond. So we say that an organic molecule has a carbon-based backbone. This is in contrast to an inorganic molecule. So an inorganic molecule does not have those carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon bonds, and it doesn't have a carbon to hydrogen bond. Okay, so let's talk about the four biomolecules of life. So the four biomolecules of life are lipids or fats, nucleic acids, so DNA or RNA, you have carbohydrates, and then you have proteins. Now, in my case, in addition to these four biomolecules, I'm also going to include water. And the reason why I'm including water is because, as we already know, water makes 75% of you. And we know that we live in a planet that is basically surrounded by water, and the cells in your body are basically surrounded by water. But if you look in any book, they're only going to mention those four biomolecules, and they're not going to talk about water. Now, one important fact in science, one important fact in biology is that shape matters. Shape matters when it comes to science, shape matters when it comes to biology. If a molecule doesn't have the proper shape, it cannot do its proper function. And essentially, any disease is caused because a molecule doesn't have the proper shape. Okay, so the four biomolecules of life are carbohydrates, lipids or fat, proteins, and nucleic acids. And this can be DNA or RNA. Again, the four biomolecules are carbohydrates, lipids or fats, proteins, and nucleic acid. So why are the biomolecules of life important? Well, because human diseases are caused by having too much or too little of these biomolecules, or having a biomolecule that doesn't have the proper shape. So human diseases are caused by having too much, too little, or having a biomolecule that doesn't have the proper shape. So some of the diseases that are caused by the biomolecules of life include diabetes. So diabetes is caused by having too much carbohydrates in your blood, by having too much glucose in your blood. So our body, or the cells in our body, need glucose in order to obtain energy. But if you have too much glucose, it's not a good thing. Stroke. Stroke is caused by having too much lipids or fats in your body. Alzheimer's disease are caused by having a protein that doesn't have the proper function. And essentially what's happening here is that the neurons or those cells are essentially dying. And cystic fibrosis is caused by a mutation in your DNA that is going to create a protein that doesn't have the proper function. Again, shape matters when it comes to biology. So these four biomolecules of life share a similar organization. They are composed of what we call monomers, which are basically one chemical subunit. So for example, a glucose molecule, if you will. And if you have a bunch of glucose molecules that are bonded together, then we call that a polymer. So a polymer is just a bunch of monomers that are bonded together. Okay, so let's talk about the function of each of those biomolecules. So carbohydrate is a primary source of energy for your body. And this includes sugars and their derivatives, for example, glucose, lactose, and starch. So there's a lot of diets out there who are basically restricting the amount of carbohydrates that you can intake. And one of the common side effects of this, or at least that people have reported, is that in the morning they seem to have less energy. And it's because, again, carbohydrates are the primary source of energy. So basically, your body uses carbohydrates before they use any of the other biomolecules of life. All right, so lipids are fats. So one of the functions of the lipids or fat is that they function as a long-term energy storage and insulation. So because they serve as a long-term energy storage, once you have gained that fat, it takes a lot of energy to break down a fat molecule. So whenever you have a gain weight, it takes a strenuous exercise in order to lose weight. Fat also function to regulate growth and development. The cells in your body are communicating with one another, and lipids or fats are important for that specific function. Also, the majority of the cell membrane in the cells, they're actually made out of fats or phospholipids. So once you break down the cell membrane, essentially you kill the cell. So proteins. There's a whole diverse functions when it comes to proteins. So proteins are made out of amino acids. And just like I mentioned before, shape matters when it comes to biology. So some examples of proteins include antibodies. So antibodies are helping you to fight virus and bacteria. Enzymes. The function of the enzymes is to make a reaction go much faster. So when it comes to the function of proteins, this includes structural, protective, regulatory, contractile, and transport. So as you can see, there's a whole diversity when it comes to the function of proteins. So the proteins are made out of amino acids. There are 20 known amino acids. 9 of those amino acids are what we call essential, which means that your body cannot produce them. And so you obtain those amino acids from the food that you consume. And this is why it is extremely crucial for you to have a well-balanced diet. So those 20 amino acids, they share things in common. So each amino acid has an amino group, which is basically a nitrogen bonded to 3 hydrogens. They also have a carbon to hydrogen bond, and then they have a carboxyl group, which is basically carbon bonded to 2 oxygen. And what is different between each of those amino acids, it's the R group. So the R group, it's different between all these 20 amino acids.